originally in Greek, cosmos means ornament, such as a man, woman, or horse would wear. And you can see that, I guess, in the English word like cosmetics.
Yeah.
But I wondered if you could talk about that a bit, like get into how that idea of ornament might speak to some of what you were talking about. And then also you brought up with Thoreau, and he said we forget that they call the world cosmos or beauty, which I guess we're going into. And if you could just speak to that.
Yeah, I don't know Greek well enough to be able to argue or know whether the original Greek sense included, I mean, what's interesting about beauty and has engaged many people to think about it is it can have that trivializing sense that ornament registers and that Thoreau criticizes when he talks about architecture, for instance. These heavily ornate and ornamented buildings that simply clutter up the landscape versus the truly beautiful buildings that are organically, the kind of thing that Frank Lloyd Wright was really responsive to and in this more organic kind of American architecture sought to realize in buildings, building on Thoreau's philosophy and others, but Thoreau was one of Frank Lloyd Wright's gurus, predecessors, so that when Humboldt takes the sense in Cosmos of cosmos and sort of runs through the meaning of the word literally, and as Thoreau sort of takes it up and starts to employ it, you always see it emphasizing the sense of beauty, the broader and more general, and I think the deeper and more organic sense of beauty. Really in both of them, I'm thinking about places in Humboldt. We had a discussion yesterday about luxury. And I'm thinking in Humboldt, where ornamentation and the association with luxury is part of the problem, because again, it conduces to slavery, both enslaving others but also enslaving ourselves. To sort of there's no end to it, so you always want more luxury, more and larger and fancier and more ornate houses instead of getting to the heart. So I think what you're pointing to is an interesting divergence, that sort of paradoxical sense of beauty that can allow us to dismiss beauty, but that at the same time we're trying to recapture and reorient towards this deeper sense. Does that help?
Yeah. Related to that would be the ambivalent approach to like the cosmopolitan.
Yeah.
That with luxury.
Right.
Or the cosmopolitan traveler that you
That's a huge question, and that's something that, the sense of cosmopolitan is kind of a superficial globetrotter, is again, I think, what Thoreau is resisting, and he's trying to model a way, and of course he didn't travel the globe, he resisted Isaac Hecker's invitation to do so, interestingly, to go to Walden. So that tells us something about, how he's going to travel the globe, but it doesn't tell us that he wasn't a traveler. And he tries to redefine cosmopolitanism in this. Again, the home cosmography is that way of pulling it into what matters, correcting it. Yeah.
I enjoyed your talks very much.
Thanks.
Could you explain the word Georgic? I didn't quite get what you meant by that.
Oh, well, I'm not a specialist in this, but Georgic goes back to Virgil's Georgics, which are poems that elaborate on the working world of the farm, the beauties of it, but also the productive relationships of it, and the seasons, and the fitness and proper activities to be engaging in, given the set of seasons. So it's just a formal term that has then come down to us for the kind of poetry or poetic mode that emphasizes engagement with nature and the land through farming or through gardening and agriculture. Yeah.
Thank you. Clear, provocative, well delivered. It was really wonderful to listen to what you had to say.
Thanks.
I had some questions about when you were talking about ontology and in the Georgic critique, you were talking about the vice of wilderness and part of their critique of wilderness because it keeps out the poorer people and those that don't have access and whatnot. I wonder, I think there are meaningful and significant distinctions that can be made between the words nature and culture.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're talking about a wilderness critique, we want to say that there are places that people don't live, but they go, and they visit, and there's some kind of, maybe it's metaphysical distinction.
We don't live in churches either. We go to
when
the...
you use the word cosmos, I thought, boy, that's really interesting, because that can maybe bridge that divide.
Yeah.
You could say there's culture, there's nature, they can be separated in some kind of meaningful way.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's cosmos, which can bring them both together.
Well, even more. Cosmos is what happens when they are fruitfully brought together, right? So you don't have cosmos until they're integrated, until they're in that relationship. And that's what, I left it up, but there's a, part of my book talks about why it was that Humboldt had to write essentially 2 books. You go looking for the book Cosmos, and actually what you'll find on the shelves are 2 volumes. Now, the first one is about nature. I mean, physical, the stars and the planets and so forth. But then the second one, which people too often overlook, is the really extraordinary one and the innovative one. It's a history of the concept of nature, going back before the ancient Greeks and pursued in all possible cultural meanings and relevance for contemporary art and politics and social movements. And that is stunning. And that's, so Humboldt, he at one point he realizes the thing is getting, I go too long too, sorry, but he realizes he's going on too long. He desperately wants this to be part of a single volume, one big single book that can never be torn into 2 parts. And he's just in despair because there's so much to say. And the publisher has told him, Alex, I can't bind that book into a single volume. It's got to be 2 volumes. And Humboldt can't, that's exactly what he was trying to avoid. So in his vision, they should be bound literally as these communicating halves. And that's what makes it cosmos. Yeah.
We're going to only have time for one more question, and then anyone else, Laura, has graciously agreed to stay
I'll be
and
here.
talk. We've already decided that she could talk for a day and a half on the subject.
And have, by the way.
To hear it for a day and a half. But I have one more hand over here, and then we're going to have to take a break, or we'll be here all afternoon. Your lunches will spoil, and the speakers won't be heard.
Thank you very much, Andy.
Thank you.
Very much. What you said toward the end about we have this universal sense of the day coming to an end, in paraphrasing, resonated very much with me. And I was wondering if you can, how we can account for that. Actually, how would Thoreau account for that global angst that you're implying? Again, putting words in the mouth. What would Thoreau say? How do we account for this universality of this feeling? And it's clearly, at least for me, resonates, and I'm sure that other people in the house,
I started thinking about that when I first started reading Thoreau. It was in the 70s, and it was in this sense that the world is turning a corner then, and we're further down that same turn. But I came to the point in Thoreau's early writings where he's working on, in Week on the Conquered Merrimack River, where he's writing about the shad and the recurrence of the little fingerlings as they are in the flooded meadows in the spring. And the urgency and energy every spring of the fish. And he says that the message of the shad is that the end of the world is not yet. And he says the same thing over and over. Every time he looks at the seeds that have he picks the chestnuts, for instance, in the fall, and looks at the way that the husk is tightly wrapped around the seed at the core, and how elaborate this is. And here's this dead husk, but there inside it is this living, vital energy that just needs to be released. And he sees that as a promise. It's nature's way of promising, again, the end of the world is not yet. And, the sun is but a morning star. It becomes a kind of leitmotif for him, that he keeps finding ways to tell us and to believe in himself over and over, that no matter, and he lived at a time when, things were turning a corner then too, and things did not, they could look very grim. This is the cosmic view. Again, Humboldt despaired because he thought that America was the dawning of a new age of kind of Republican democratic Republican democracies would sweep the globe, monarchies would be gone, injustices would all be righted, and it didn't happen. Instead, it became very reactionary, and so he started to despair. And his response to a friend was to say, well, even though I know that the cosmos is working toward a common good, towards this better state, it's very hard to hold on to that when you see catastrophes and disasters happening in your own life. Kings going crazy and massacres happening and wars being started. So it's very hard to keep your eyes on the stars when the planet you live on is devolving into chaos. You have to deal with the chaos, but at the same time, only if you remember the stars are there, in Humboldt's sense, the triangulation. Can you have the heart and the courage to deal with the chaos? So there were times when his energy flagged, and I'm sure Thoreau had bad days too. But they both come back to that same sense that, somehow if we don't find hope, if we don't believe in a future, we most surely will not get there. So they're really trying to use poetry, as I think I am in this kind of discourse, to insist that maybe against hope we have to have it, and that Cosmos does give us a kind of new way of framing, a very deep old way of framing that I think has a kind of bridging effect into a future that I think we can believe in, and maybe if we can keep working towards it, it actually could come about better. Anyway.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you all.